Okay, this is Johnny Tremain by Esther Forbes, chapters 3 through 6. Okay, we're going to actually trace Johnny's character in these chapters a little bit. Let me get my pointer here. And because a lot of the point of these chapters in particular is showing the character of a boy in these different circumstances. Let's see if I've got it. Yeah, that'll work. Okay, so at the beginning, his circumstances were that he was the best silversmith apprentice, and Johnny was a proud bully. Then he was a destitute, disabled boy. Destitute means just poor, has nothing and nobody. And he wallowed in self-pity, inabilities, and loneliness. Okay? These are totally different characteristics, totally different, almost you'd say, people. Okay? And so kind of what we're seeing here is that Johnny as a boy, his character changes with his circumstances. Okay? Because a proud bully is very different than a wallowing, lonely guy. Okay? So then Rab starts a friendship with him, and he begins to, try to get some honest jobs and things like that. Okay? And then remember, he ended up with some money, and he brought Izana and Scylla some gifts, and everything was going great. And then Izana did not want his disabled hand to touch her. And that was really the lowest point for Johnny. Those were really his only two friends, and he goes into complete despair and feels like that everything is against him. So he goes from kind of, things are looking up to, with one comment by a small girl, yes, I'm just a ugly disabled child or something, Okay? So then he decides, when he has reached the bottom there, that his only hope is that he needs this Mr. Light, who he knows does not have a good character, because he knows his mom said, don't even try it unless you end up as this destitute, disabled boy. He goes to him and asks for help. He decides to do this, okay? So suddenly, none of these problems are his problems. He goes around with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder again. He goes back to his home and starts cutting down the new guy and everybody else, and just decides this is now Mr. Light's problem and I am now some fancy guy, and starts acting like that. Then he gets thrown in jail. Okay, at this point is what we would call he's reached rock bottom. Okay, he is confused. He's just sort of numb to the situation. This is not his most emotional time. He's just sort of at this point making the decision. Rock bottom for people is different places, because rock bottom is where you decide, I am no longer going to continue in bad behaviors. I'm going to start making positive changes. Well, this is his. So this is where he decides that he's going to start being what he wants to be. So he finally goes and he gets a job with Rab at the Observer. And remember, when he first met Rab, that Rab had a really neat comment. He said, well, you could get work if you wanted to, because, one disabled job, doesn't mean there's nothing you can do, but it just wasn't the kind of things that Johnny wanted to do. Well, so now, Johnny has decided, yeah, I'm going to actually try to get the kind of things that I will be able to do. And so he really latches on to Rab. And Rab is a good role model, so this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but we're still seeing that Johnny is imitating what's around him. Now it's a relational imitation instead of a circumstantial imitation, meaning he used to, well, if I'm disabled, I'm going to act like I can't do anything. If I am a rich kid, I'm going to act like that. Now it's, I'm going to act like this boy because things seem to be going well with him. Okay, so he's relationally needy. Now, the reason I say that is because remember he wanted to still be supportive of Scylla and Azana, his only friends kind of from his old life, but he finds himself basically not, feeling like he should be interested and he should be supportive, but he's pretty self-absorbed and just looking for relationships to help himself out, help him find himself and things like that right now. So he's kind of just not giving relationally yet, only getting. And he's very reflective. He actually starts reading a lot of books and spending a lot of time being still and pondering things. This is kind of his finding himself time, okay? So then, the circumstances, he becomes stable in basically a new family in a new position. He likes the baby, he likes the job, he's good at it. So he starts becoming trustworthy. And do you remember when he goes to Mr. Adams' house and the servant spills stuff on him, and he imitates what Rab told him to do, to stop just lashing out at everybody, and he controls his emotions, and then he gets kind of a new work, and he gets a piece of pie, or whatever it was, I can't remember, but anyway. And so we're starting to see that he's controlling himself, becoming a little bit more what he should be, and we see that affecting his circumstances. Instead of his circumstances affecting him, we see his character affecting his circumstances. Okay? So the theme from that whole chart is that boyhood is while your character is still developing. And this is going to be kind of a theme of the whole book, is how basically war and these type of situations changes boys to men. So we're going to talk about what a man looks like more in later chapters. But so boyhood, okay, your character is still developing, okay? Like we saw in the chart, you're a different person in different situations, okay? And we call that emotional based decision making, okay? And we think of girls as more emotional, and there's a reason for that. They show their emotions to boys more than boys, but boys also can fall into making their decisions based on emotions. And that you can't make your decisions based on whether or not you're angry, or whether or not you're in despair, or whether or not something looks pretty hard, okay? So we also see that boyhood is you're a different person when with different people. In the teenage years, people talk about, peer pressure. Well, that's relationship-based decision-making, okay? That is saying that an immature boyhood is when you make your decisions based on how it will affect the relationships. And so that's why peer pressure works. You don't have an ideal of who or how I should act, or what's right or wrong. You're just doing it based on what will make my relationships better. And, just however the circumstances come, you just act however your emotions, state for it to do. Okay? So a theme that goes along with this is act the way you want to be treated, not the way you are treated. The way you are treated is a result of the way you act. Okay? And we saw this in the book. Rab said to Johnny, he said, the reason that, your disability, your hand used to be so horrible to people is because you acted like it was. Now that you're like, it's no big deal, I can still do so many things. Yeah, the girls will dance and even hold your hand, and nobody's going to think a thing of it, okay? So, if you find yourself being treated like a baby, you have to go, am I acting like a baby? And if you want to get out of being treated like a baby, the best way is start acting like a man. It's a little bit of a slow process sometimes. I can even give you an example. We moved at one point, actually, in my adult life, and I had children and everything, and we went to a church with a congregation of women that were much older than me, had grandkids and that sort of thing. They started treating me like that, I was very, very young. And in fact, at that time, I looked really young. And so I kind of went, well, I want relationships. I've just moved. So I started sort of acting like, oh, yes, I need all this help figuring out my life and my children. And that wasn't really the truth. And so then I started being treated as incompetent because that's what they viewed me just from externals. And then so I started acting like that. And I did not, that wasn't the way I wanted to be or to whatever. So I started changing the way I acted. I started, showing competency in making good comments and not just, playing the role they had put me in. And it was a slower process than I would like, and it was a little bit frustrating. But eventually, almost all of those older ladies started to treat me the age and the ability level and for who I was. So it may be slower than you like, but, act the way you want to be treated. Okay? So just things to talk about. When people have a disability or anything different about them, that's the first thing that will stand out to most of us. And usually it's the last thing the person wants you to notice. So realize that. And it doesn't even have to be a disability, just anything different about a person. We typically want to fit in, I guess is a good word, and we typically want to be seen as, a good friend, somebody that would make a good friend, and that sort of thing. So how, think about how do we get past externals and small things to realize that inside we are all, the same and can all benefit from relationships with one another. Along the same token, so Izana's comments about his hand upset him more than Mr. Light's accusations of that he was a thief, okay? Why was that? Why did her comments that weren't near as hurtful become more hurtful because of the relationship? And, why are we so much more emotional depending on who does it? Okay? All right. For our thinking activity, I actually want you to just flip back to the slide about the tracing character change in Johnny's life. Okay? Now I want you just to write down this chart. And what you're going to do is you're going to put like the circumstance, maybe, destitute, disabled boy. And then I want you to pretend you were Johnny in that circumstance. Let's say you just burned your hand and lost your family and ended up on the street trying to figure out what would you tend to your kind of sinful nature, natural boyish reaction. Would you be one that gets angry? Would you be one that despairs? What would you be like? And then what do you think you, as your unique person, this will be a little different for each person, what should be kind of your manhood response to that situation? Okay? And hope this will help us to see how that, the other thing I want you to see in this chart is these answers shouldn't be completely, different dependent on the circumstances, okay? Whereas these could be very different. You may, if you were a poor disabled boy, say, I would probably tend towards despair, locking myself up all by myself. And then when you get to, I think I might be Mr. Light's grandson, the richest guy in Boston, I would probably, make lots of friends, and I would probably, whatever. So do you see how that a boyish response changes on the circumstances? But a godly man's character response, and both of those should maybe be humility, maybe be thinking of others, those sort of things. So these should be more similar to these as your character becomes, based more on right and wrong and on gospel things that don't change with circumstances.